Hi guys, my name is Tommy, and I did a lot of front-end work as well as writing for Fifth, and I'm just going to talk about that today. So I helped work a lot on the login page, the signup page, the chat pages, and helped bootstrap the website up. So we built this website on Node, and for the front end we used a lot of jQuery as well as Bootstrap, which is a grid-based library to help lay out your website. So let's take a look at the code right here. So this is main.handlebars. The left is the banner as well as the image. So I helped to Photoshop an image up for Fifth Find Your Flock. And the nav bar is right here for the top right. It's for login and about. In the footer we have the admin user login profile, and that routes directly into user routes. And main.cs is just the styling that we used. So we used a lot of green for this to promote collaboration. And yeah, so if we go into login.handlebars, we'll be able to see the different forms that we created for login as well as anonymous user login. And both these buttons over here, login and sign in as anonymous user, goes to user routes in the authentication. So that's all the way up here. And we check whether or not the person is an anonymous user or whether or not they are attempting to log in with credentials. So we do the proper error handling. For anonymous user, we just add a ID to their name. And over here, we just check using Joe's database calls in model.js whether or not the person has the correct credentials. We also create a modal over here. So in login.handlebars, I create a modal off of Bootstrap's template, and I just adjusted that template in order to meet our needs. So there's username, password, confirm password, email, phone number, etc. So we can just create a user over here. So it could be new user 1, new user 1, and then password could be new user 1. Email could be user1 at emailg.com. Phone number could be 111-111-1111, and interest could be being new. Okay, so let's hit sign up, and that should flash sign up complete. So then we log in using new user 1, and hit login. So everything that we do in user routes just was able to flash authentication successful. So it should say, yeah, authentication successful. And then when we sign up, so there should be a route for that. When we sign up, then it'll tell you whether or not the sign up was successful or unsuccessful. And this has the Bootstrap grid layout as well. So you'd be able to see in home.handlebars that it's Bootstrap based off column MD. And we just use that for just laying out the grid. We also use that in admin routes. So here's the chat.handlebars page. So chat.handlebars, I add a lot of span tags that have display none, and that's the reason for that is that we can then grab it. So we can pass in any information through the server into the HTML by flashing through handlebars, and then we're able to grab anything we need using client-sided JavaScript, which I'll talk about more in a bit. And we just see that we can enter a chat name. We have the div class for adding chats. So in this grid style, we give a weight of 3 to the left side, which is this side, and we give a weight of 9 over here to the right side for the chats. So that allows us to have 3 chats per line. So over here, there's nothing right now because we will use client-sided JavaScript in order to just add the chats through that. So over here, that's where we are able to grab elements based off their ID and use whatever we need in order to add the chats. So I did some error handling for checking whether or not the chat name has a name, because we don't want to add a chat if it doesn't have a name. So chat name does not exist. So it'll prevent you from adding chat. So if you want to add another thing like new chat, then new chat would be right there. And right now the footer is blocking just a bit, but we'll get it fixed. It's because the footer right now is in a fixed position, but once again, that can be fixed. Okay, so Now over here we'll grab the chat ID, the window ID, the input ID, and we'll use these IDs to put them inside a chat box template. So over here I created the chat box template by having the header, styling it up a bit in chat.css, which is right here. So I styled that up, and I used put some overflowing for scroll, just adjusted the heights for everything, tried to style it up a bit, and every time we click a button, we just send a message. So over here, I just tried to organize the code a bit by adding indents based off of where the tags should be if this was HTML. Unfortunately, it's JavaScript, and you have to put a string either as one line, or you have to put multiple appendations for each line of a string. So so we can see that in action. So those tags, those span tags that we used, they can be used in sending a message. So here's a new message, and so we take the new user's username and we just put that in front over down here. So we use user, and then we add their username, and then add their message, and we format it and use sockets, which Sam will be talking about, to send the message. And then there's a lot of transitions that we can see, for example, fading in for the about page, FAQ page, and everything like that. And that's just what I did for a lot of the JavaScript. Just faded in, faded in, faded in, faded in, and a lot of different transitions. I also used a lot of WebKit for the hovering. So when you hover over it, this is actually CSS, where if you go to the home.css, you can adjust and transition based off of any kind of CSS tag that already exists. So for this example, we use background color, and that changes the background color to this color in 1 second. And that's about it. I did a lot of styling and laying out for the website, and yeah.
Front-end developer of Find Your Flock. I did a bunch of CSS file and touch up on the user interface to make the website look more user-friendly and clean. And also did the about page and the frequency asked question page, as well as set up some of these pages layout for better implementation of the context. So starting from the CSS files, they're really basic stuff. Nothing really complicated. No special unique that I use. It's all following proper syntax. So that's the home CSS file. Pretty simple. Login CSS file. Pretty simple as well. Main CSS file. Pretty simple as well. And the main thing for the main CSS file is that I made it so it always stays at the top of this page, and the top banner stays all the way at the top of this page, and the bottom footer stays all the way to the bottom of the page all the time, regardless of what page you go, and how long the page is. So then if we move on to the some of these pages, for frequency asked questions, it's just a plain, simple HTML that displays a bunch of context by using like h1 tag and using a div, and the same thing for the about page. It's just a plain, simple HTML that displays a bunch of elements by using different tags and putting them into divs, and how to organize the HTML files. And the last thing is the home handlebars. I only set up the layout of this page. I did not really implement the context of this page, but what I did was I used column mid 4 to divide the whole page into 3 columns, and this is one of the techniques that I used to set the page layout. as you can see, I set it to 3 because one page has 12 columns at max for Bootstrap at the moment.
Hi, my name is David Nian, and I am part of the front-end development team for Find Your Flock, and I will be going over how I help set up the homepage as well as the admin page. So going off of, continuing from what Evan said in his portion, he mentioned how we set up the page so that each one has its own div class and they're set up in rows and columns. If you also notice on the page that each subject, each category has its own unique image icon, and that is also done inside the home.handlebars for this. And you can see in this line of code, the image source file takes in a JPEG image file, which these images are stored in our own image directory. And we take those image files and use them as the icons for the subject. One unique thing that makes our UI a little more sleek and nice to look at is there is a fade-in effect for when you go between the admin console and the home page, and this fade-in effect is done at the bottom of the handlebars code, which calls the home.javascript file, which is found here, and it is coded pretty simply with just header has a fade-in, message has a fade-in, and selection has a fade-in. So yeah, that's how the home page is set up right now. And moving on to the admin console, it is set up very similarly to how page set up. Each icon relates to topic, flag chats, report chats, popular chats, and banned users. And if you look at the handlebars file, it's set up very similar to how the home handlebars was. And it also takes in an image file from the image folder. And it also uses the fade-in effect from home.javascript. And a lot of this page is set up through the CSS file of admin.css, which is set up the same way as home.css, which Evans talked about in his portion as well. And the last thing I'll go over is the routing for this admin page. So before you can even enter the admin console, it checks, the routing checks to see if your credentials as a user is an administrator, and if that is successful, it will allow you to go into the admin console. Otherwise, you'll need to re-log in with admin credentials. And you can see here, it also routes to other pages if you click on a specific subject. So if I clicked on flag chats, it would go to a coming soon page, and that is routed right here, similar to how it checks your admin credentials. And it is also done again for reported chats, and that will be, if you click reported chats, it will redirect you to a reported chats page, which is coded similarly to the coming soon.
Hi, I'm Samuel Orloff, and I worked on implementing the chat functionality of the website using Socket.io. Decided to use Socket because it's really simple. It's really simple to implement, but it's also reliable, and it allows us to basically just send anything between the server and the clients, which means we can send not only the message itself, but also like an object containing info about the message and things like that. So the very first thing, I/O here in the server requires from need to npm install. The server object here is the thing that is returned by app.listen with the appropriate port. So that just means that Socket is working on our server. Over here, whenever this button here, Add Chat, is clicked, along with the chat name and the password, this function here is called. So this function, it takes the chat name, which is given by the input box from the add chat window. It takes a identifier, which is count here, and it takes the category of the page. The category of the page is sent down by the routing function when it's rendered. It's here category from this HTML element. It uses those to create this string here, and this string is basically just the chat box that will be appended. So then this chat created message is emitted along with this object, and the object is basically just the string, or the HTML string that is the chat box, and the category that the page was created on. Back on the server side, whenever a chat created message is received, it sends out a create chat box message, which is then received by the client side socket. Whenever the client side socket receives a create chat box message, first of all, it increments the count. It increments the count no matter what category page it's on, and this is just to ensure that every chat has a unique identifier across the categories. It then checks if the category that the page is currently in is the same as the category that the message was created in. If it is, then it'll append the chat to the page. Up here, if you look at the string that is, if you look at the chat box code, you can see whenever the button to send the message is clicked, it calls this function send message along with the unique identifier of the message. Send message is this function down here, which basically just creates this toSend object. The toSend object is just the message, the unique identifier for the name, or the unique identifier for the room, the username, and the category. We don't yet have username implemented in this release. We should in future, but it's not right now. So the toSend function is then sent out in this chat message, which is then back on the server side received. The server then sends out the chat message back. Whenever the client side receives a chat message, it first of all, it checks if the message category is the same category that the page is currently in. If it is, then it just appends the chat message to the appropriate unordered list for that chat. And yeah, that's how chat works.
Hi, this is Stephen Lombrew, and I am a member of Team Oriole, and I am going to talk to you about what I did for FIF. So I mainly worked on the chats, getting them saved to the database, and I worked on the profile page, and I did all the routes and stuff for that stuff as well. So, so first, I'm just going to talk about the chat.handlebars. So this is what actually renders all the chats. So we get a few variables from the response object, the response.render function, and we get the category that we're in, the chat ID, which is the count of the number of chats that we've created so far, so we can create a unique ID, and the chat1, chat2, chat3, which is the 3 most recently created chats, and the user's user information, or username, rather. So quickly moving on to the chat.js, this is the script that we use for the chat.handlebars page. So we get the count from, these are all the variables we had before, we get these from the document by ID. Then moving on, when the document is ready, we want to render the chats that were most recently created. So we make sure that these are null in case, for example, that there aren't that many chats in that category, or there might not even be any chats. So if we don't get these variables, then we want to not break the browser and make sure they aren't null before we try to append to the chat container. Um, After these are all appended, we can quickly go to the Add Chat button. So if a user wants to create a chat, they'll click this button. So when that button is clicked, we get the chat name from the document. We get its true value, so we have its actual string contents. And then we put in a check here so that if the user enters no chat name, then we alert that the chat name does not exist, and we break out of this function so we don't add a chat without a name to the database, because that would be pretty useless. So here are some variables. These are helpers for constructing the HTML string for the chat before it's appended. So we get the ID from the count. We make sure that we put its category in the Windows ID, so we know that it helps us keep track of which chats are where. So if a chat is the same name in video games and sports, it's in the right category and stuff like that. And once we use these variables to construct the HTML string, we have everything we need to save a chat to the database. So using the chat info object, which I created, we store the chat ID, the category it's in, the HTML string, and its chat name. Then through AJAX, we send this object as a JSON to the add chat URL, which is a post request. So that way, when a user adds a chat, their page doesn't have to refresh, because that would be pretty terrible if that had to happen. So that pretty much covers how the chats get added and generated dynamically. So we can go to the profile handlebars quickly. It's very simple. We just use the response object once again. We pull in the user's name, their interest, their phone, their email, and whether or not they're an admin from the session object when they log in, because you can't navigate to the profile page until you're logged in. And right now we just use a default image for the profile page. We want to implement, obviously, profile pictures later or at some point. So quickly going to the routes. This is the backend work for the add chat, but I want to start on the get request for getting the page. So this is the backend route that handles the request to get the chat page. So we get the user's information from the user session. So now we know what user it is. We get the category, which is the variable result from the request.query.category function. So we make sure the user is logged in. If they're not logged in, they can't chat. Being logged in, being an anonymous user counts as being logged in. So this is like if they somehow navigate to the page without being logged in, we flash them back to make sure that they can log in. So then we want to look up the chats based on the category, and then we count the chats so we can have the count for the user's browser, so that if they want to create a new chat, they can create a unique one and it'll get saved to the database. So here's, let's say the chat is at least, the number of recent chats is at least 3. We send the 3 chats to the front end. This would be the most recent chat, this would be the second most recent chat, and this would be the third most recent chat. Then we send the category, and we send the user's username. So we send the user's username. And then quickly going down to add chat. So this is where the AJAX request sends its JSON object to. So we want to add the chat to the database, so we get the HTML, the chat ID, the category, and the chat name, and we want to save it. After that, we want to recount to send the count to the front end. And once we do that, that is pretty much good to go for people being able to then create chats. The chat's been saved. So after this chat will be saved, let's say they refresh the page, their chat will pop back up because it's the most recently created chat. And then quickly going down the profile page, we get the user information from the session object, and then from the request object from the session. And then if the user's not logged in, we send them back to login, because you can't be on your profile page, so you're logged in. We default it to the regular user. We get their username, their phone, their email, and their interests from the user object we got from the session. And then we check if they're an admin. If they are, we change admin to administrator. Otherwise, if they don't have a username, that means they're an anonymous user. And we render that information to the profile page so that their profile information displays on the profile page. That's pretty much most of the work I did for FIF, besides some QA and debugging. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about it.
My name's Joe McCaffrey, and I'm on the database team for Find Your Flock. We use Mongo Lab, and also Mongoose to connect to Mongo Lab. So we have 3 collections: non-schemas, chat schemas, and user schemas. So non-schemas holds the data for anonymous users. Chat schemas holds the chat for the chat boxes in the website, and the user schemas holds the username and password and other data for people who want to make accounts with Find Your Flock. So looking at the code, we have foif/lib/model.js. You have to require Mongoose from npm install. So to connect to the database, Mongoose needs a bunch of parameters, which are some of these. Here's our URL for connecting to the database. So we do mongoose.connect. So we connect once. So we originally connected every single time in a function. So when we call a function, it would connect to the database, and when we exited the function, it would close the connection to the database, and we found that to be just way too slow. So we have one connection for the entire instance of the server. So user schema, we have username, password, ID, admin, phone, email, and interest, which are all required true. So anonymous schema is just the name and the unique ID. Chat schema, field ID, subject, name, and password, which is optional, so required false. So we need to model all of these schemas into user schema, non-schema, and chat schema underscore schema. So exports user add, does a person.save. So you say var person equals new user schema. So you save it to the database, to that collection. So what it'll do is if it finds somebody who has the same username as you, it will send back an error. So you can see so I went through the web page to sign up, and I tried Joe and Joe, which is already in the database, which I know. So here's the call right here. And so we flash an error username taken because somebody is already named Joe and Joe in the database. Okay. So lookup looks up the person in the database. We call user schema find one, username and password, to look up the when people first log in to the website Find Your Flock. We have countanon, which counts the number of documents in the anon schema collection. Okay, let's see. We have so destroy. So when the server exits, we need to destroy the anonymous collection because every single time the server comes up, we need to create we want a fresh database for all of the anonymous data. Actually in the server code, which we'll look at a little bit later, we catch a Control-C, and it calls this export to drop the collection anon schemas. So every single time that you run the server, you get a fresh anon schema collection. Okay, so add chat, very much like adding a user or an anonymous user to the database. We call save chat .save. So we made a new chat schema with all of these fields. So we saved it to the database and then also look it up. We look it up by just subject, and it will return all of the things that that one subject has, which is what we want. We want everything that's in that chat, everything that's in that chat when we query the database. So we also need to count how many things that are in the chat, so we can create a unique ID. So we use count chat. Okay.